After years of silence, the unthinkable happened. The lights went out, his music hit, and CM Punk said the words that changed everything. The air in the arena had a familiar rhythm to it, a comfortable, predictable cadence that every fan knows by heart. It's the sound of a show in its final act, the energy high, but the surprises seemingly over. Drew McIntyre stood in the center of the ring, a victor, his breath clouding in the cool, conditioned air. The lights caught the sweat on his brow, turning it into a temporary crown. He held the microphone with the ease of a man who's made this space his home, his office. His voice boomed through the speakers, hitting all the right notes of triumph and defiance. He spoke of championships, of legacy, of the path forward. It was a perfect promo, delivered with the raw power that had defined his career. The crowd responded on cue, their cheers and boos a well-practiced chorus. Everything was exactly as it should be. Backstage producers were likely looking at their watches, planning the final graphics, getting ready to wrap another successful broadcast. There was a sense of finality in the air, the feeling of a story reaching its clean, televised conclusion. The narrative for the night had been written, performed, and was now coming to a close. No one, not the fans, not Drew, and certainly not the people in the production truck, had any reason to believe that the script was about to be torn to pieces by a ghost. It was just another night, another show, until it wasn't. It began not with a bang, but with a crackle, a sharp, abrasive burst of static that cut through Drew McIntyre's speech and silenced 20,000 people in a single, jarring instant. The arena lights snapped off, plunging the entire building into a blackness so complete it felt like a void. For a moment there was only confusion. A power failure? A technical glitch? The collective breath of the crowd was held in a silent, questioning gasp. And then it hit. The opening guitar riff of Cult of Personality. It wasn't just music. It was a memory, an echo from a past everyone had been told was finished. The confusion didn't just turn into a roar. It detonated. It was a physical force, a shockwave of sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. When the lights came back up, he was there, standing on the entrance ramp, cloaked in shadow, a silhouette that had haunted the industry for nearly a decade. CM Punk. He didn't move. He just stood there, letting the tidal wave of noise wash over him. His walk to the ring was slow, deliberate. It wasn't a return, it was a reclamation. Every step he took on that ramp felt heavy, measured, as if he were walking back through time, gathering the years he'd lost. The feeling wasn't just excitement, it was something deeper. It was the feeling of a rule being broken, of a chapter everyone thought was closed being violently ripped open again. The microphone felt foreign in his hand, yet completely natural. CM Punk stood in the ring, the roar of the crowd finally softening to a low, electric hum of anticipation. He looked older. The fire in his eyes was still there, but it burned differently now. It wasn't the wild, chaotic blaze of a revolutionary. It was the steady, intense glow of embers that had never truly gone out. He looked at Drew McIntyre, not as an opponent, but as a landmark, a signpost of everything that had changed while he was away. He slowly raised the mic, and the last vestiges of noise in the arena vanished. "I've been gone a long time," he started, his voice quiet, almost conversational. It carried no echo of his famous pipe bombs, none of the scathing fury. It was calm, reflective. He spoke about watching from a distance, about seeing new kings rise and old empires continue. He told Drew that he respected the house he had helped build, the weight he had carried. There was no challenge in his tone, no threat. It was an acknowledgement, a quiet observation from a man who understood the burden better than most. He made it feel less like a confrontation and more like a conversation that was long overdue. The tension in the ring wasn't one of impending violence, but of unspoken history. Punk was holding a mirror up to the current landscape, and for the first time, everyone was seeing the reflection through his eyes. After a long pause, Punk's focus shifted. His eyes drifted away from Drew, sweeping over the crowd, and settling on something unseen, something deeper within the fabric of the company. "There are certain things in this business that never change," he said, his insider tone drawing everyone closer. "Certain roles, certain masks that people wear for so long, they forget what their real face looks like." The air grew thick with curiosity. This wasn't about a title. This was about something else, something far more personal. He spoke of the apex predator, the legend killer, the man who had been the one constant through every era he had ever known. He described the cold, methodical perfection of a performer who had blurred the line between character and reality so completely that perhaps not even he knew where it was anymore. He was talking about the pressure in the weight of being the same lethal entity for 2 decades. The crowd began to connect the dots, a murmur rippling through the stands. Punk let the silence hang for another beat, letting the implication land with its full, devastating weight. Then he finally said the name, not with a shout, but with the quiet intensity of an unavoidable truth. "I want to talk to Randy Orton." The name hung in the air, and the entire story of the night, of the industry, shifted on its axis. It was no longer a return. It was a reckoning. Backstage, the controlled chaos of the gorilla position had frozen into stunned silence. Headsets were filled with static and questions. Producers stared at the monitors, their faces a mixture of disbelief and panic. This wasn't on the schedule. This wasn't in the script. While everyone scrambled for an answer, for a plan, Randy Orton sat alone in his locker room, watching a small screen. The sound was off, but he didn't need to hear the words. He could read the story on Punk's face, aid in the atmosphere of the arena. Orton's expression was a blank canvas, betraying nothing. It was the face he'd perfected over 20 years, impassive, cold, unreadable. But if you looked closer, you could see it. A subtle tightening around his eyes. The almost imperceptible clenching of his jaw. It wasn't the performative anger of the viper. It was the quiet, simmering rage of a man whose sanctuary had just been invaded. Punk wasn't calling out a character. He was calling out the person behind it. He was pulling at a thread that Orton had spent a lifetime weaving into an impenetrable tapestry. In that quiet room, away from the cameras and the roar of the crowd, the legend receded, and the man was left, and the man was angry. The calm he projected was a dam, and for the first time in a very long time, a crack was beginning to show. He stood up slowly, not with theatrical purpose, but with a heavy, dangerous resolve. The first few notes of Orton's theme music sliced through the arena, but the crowd's reaction was different this time. It wasn't the usual cheer for a celebrated veteran. It was a gasp, a collective intake of breath. The story had become real. Randy Orton emerged from the tunnel, and right away, something was off. His signature walk, that slow, deliberate, predatory saunter, was gone. In its place was a stiff, rigid stride. A man containing something. He wasn't playing the part of the viper. He was actively fighting to keep it from consuming him. His eyes were fixed on the ring, locked onto Punk with an intensity that felt raw and unfiltered. He didn't look at the fans. He didn't soak in the moment. He was a man on a mission, but the mission felt deeply, uncomfortably personal. As he climbed the steel steps and slipped between the ropes, an unnatural silence fell over the ring. Drew McIntyre, a formidable presence in his own right, seemed to fade into the background. There were only 2 people in the world now. Punk, the ghost who had returned to speak a forbidden truth, and Orton, the legend whose carefully constructed reality was being threatened. They stood face to face, inches apart, saying nothing. The air crackled with a tension that no script could ever produce. This was the precipice between performance and reality. Randy Orton didn't reach for a microphone. He didn't need one. His presence alone was a statement. He just stared, his eyes boring into Punk, searching for the angle, the motive. It was the look of a strategist, a predator assessing a threat. But Punk didn't give him the fight he was expecting. He didn't raise his voice or posture for a brawl. Instead, he leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a near whisper that the microphone barely caught. "It's been a long time, Randy," he said. the words laced with a strange mix of nostalgia and confrontation. "I look at you and I see the same guy, the same killer, the same mask." Punk took a small step back, giving him space, but his words closed the distance between them. "I just have to ask, after all these years, after all the titles and all the main events, are you still in there? Is Randy still in there, or is it just the Viper now?" The question was a quiet bomb. It wasn't an insult to his legacy. It was a direct challenge to his identity. The camera pushed in tight on Orton's face, and for a fleeting, almost imperceptible second, something flickered. A crack in the marble facade. It was a flash of vulnerability, of raw human anger. It was the look of a man who had just heard a question he'd spent half his life trying to avoid asking himself. Orton finally took the microphone from the referee. His hand was steady, but his knuckles were white. He brought it to his lips, and the crowd held its breath, waiting for the familiar, venomous tirade. He tried. He started down the well-worn path, his voice low and menacing. He talked about his legacy, about being the one constant, the true legend in this business. He mentioned his family, the responsibility of his name, but the words felt hollow, rehearsed. The usual surgical precision was gone, replaced by a strained defensive edge. Then he lost the thread. His focus shifted from the character of CM Punk to the man he knew. "You don't get to come back here," Orton seethed, his voice cracking with an emotion that was too raw for television. "And talk about masks. You ran away. I stayed. I built this. This is mine." It was a small slip, but it was everything. The line delivery wasn't from the Viper. It was from Randy. It was the outburst of a man who felt his entire life's work, his entire identity, being questioned by someone who had walked away from it all. The anger was real. The resentment was real. For a moment, the performance stopped, and 20,000 people saw the man behind the curtain. And he was furious. The moment hung in the air, heavy and unresolved. Orton stood there, his chest heaving, the raw words he'd just spoken echoing in the sudden silence. He looked down at the microphone in his hand as if he didn't know how it got there. He had lost control, just for a second, but it was a second that couldn't be taken back. Without another word, he dropped the mic, turned, and left the ring. His exit wasn't triumphant or menacing. It was abrupt, almost a retreat. He walked back up the ramp, never looking back, the rigid control returning to his posture as he disappeared behind the curtain. The show's producers, desperate to regain control of their narrative, quickly cut to a commercial break. But the feeling couldn't be erased. The crowd wasn't buzzing with excitement for a future match. They were processing what they had just witnessed. It was a quiet, confused awe. The commentators, usually so quick to frame a story, spoke in hushed, uncertain tones. They had just seen something they couldn't package into a hype video. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't a promo battle. It was an exposure, a brief, stunning glimpse into the immense, crushing pressure of maintaining a persona for 2 decades. The story wasn't about who won the exchange. It was about the cost of the war that rages inside a performer, year after year. What happened that night was never really about CM Punk's return. Not truly. His appearance was just the catalyst, the spark that lit a fuse that had been burning quietly for 20 years. It was about the fine, almost invisible line between the man and the myth, and what happens when someone dares to erase it on live television. We, as fans, grow comfortable with the legends we watch. We see them as constants, as characters in a story that we love. We forget the human being who has to live with the echoes of the crowd, the weight of the name, the pressure to be the killer, the Viper, every single night. That night, for just a moment, we saw the weight. We saw the exhaustion behind the cold stare, the frustration behind the perfect promo. Punk didn't throw a punch, but he landed the most devastating blow imaginable. He spoke a quiet truth. He reminded one of the greatest performers of all time that the character he had perfected was, in the end, a choice he had to keep making. That moment wasn't for the highlight reels. It was for the history books, a quiet, emotional reminder that even the most stoic legends are still human, and sometimes the mask cracks.